There exists a level of intelligence so frightening that most men will never acknowledge it. They will call it arrogance, madness, evil, anything to protect their illusion of safety, because to admit its existence is to admit how small they truly are. It's not the intelligence you find in classrooms or the kind praised by the masses. It's a silent, calculating awareness that doesn't seek applause, doesn't chase validation, and doesn't explain itself. It simply watches. And in its stillness, it sees through everything, the smiles, the moral masks, the little performances that men call personality. It's the kind of intelligence that doesn't just understand the world, it sees the wiring behind it. And once you see that, you can never unsee it. What most people call smart is nothing more than performance, a memorized dance. They learn just enough to appear intelligent to other shallow minds. They parrot quotes, debate theories they barely understand, and decorate their ignorance with eloquent words. They study how to sound wise rather than how to become wise. Watch them in conversation. They wait for their turn to speak, not to listen. They collect knowledge the way children collect coins, to display, to compare, to feel superior. Their intelligence serves ego, not truth. Their wit feeds insecurity, not clarity. And in their desperate attempt to be seen as intelligent, they reveal how blind they truly are. Real intelligence does not compete. It does not need to be acknowledged. It sits in silence, because silence is where deception cannot breathe. It observes patterns, not arguments. It understands that truth isn't found in noise, but in contradiction. It listens longer than it speaks. It speaks only to test, to expose, to reveal. And when it finally speaks, it doesn't sound beautiful, it sounds dangerous, because it cuts through illusions that society depends on. Those who hear it either awaken or attack it. And that is why true intelligence walks alone. You can always recognize false intelligence by its hunger for attention. The intellectual showman, the philosopher with a spotlight, the self-proclaimed thinker who measures worth by applause, all of them orbit around the same sun, approval. They want to be known as deep, not to actually be deep. They thrive on the image of understanding, not on the pain of earning it. They cannot endure solitude because their ideas are sustained by others' validation, so they surround themselves with mirrors, not windows. They call it confidence, but it's dependence. They quote dead geniuses to hide their lack of originality. They study humanity but never themselves. And when you question them, they crumble because memorized intelligence cannot defend itself when confronted with raw awareness. True intelligence is colder. It has no interest in sounding brilliant. It seeks to understand why people pretend, why they lie even to themselves, why they destroy what threatens their image of control. It dissects emotion without losing empathy. It can love without becoming blind, forgive without forgetting, trust without surrender. It doesn't need to dominate others, because it already dominates its own impulses. It doesn't fear manipulation, because it knows exactly how it works. To the untrained eye, this looks emotionless, but it's not. It's mastery, the ability to separate feeling from fact, illusion from design, noise from truth. It is a mirror that reflects every weakness without distortion. That's why most people can't stand it. It shows them what they are. When such intelligence enters a room, it doesn't need to speak. The air changes. People feel exposed without knowing why. Their mannerisms shift. Their laughter becomes nervous. Their stories start to sound rehearsed, because deep down, they sense it. This presence can see through them. It doesn't fall for charm, excuses, or sympathy. It studies motives, not words. It remembers tone more than content. It sees the contradiction between what is said and what is meant. And once it understands a person, it never unlearns them. This is not empathy. This is precision. The awareness that everything human is predictable if you know what to look for. But here lies the curse. The more aware you become, the more you lose the ability to connect. You stop laughing at jokes that rely on illusion. You stop believing in promises built on denial. You stop belonging to crowds that worship distraction. You begin to see manipulation in everything: advertisements, kindness, politics, love. You realize that most people don't want truth. They want comfort. They don't want clarity. They want confidence. They don't want intelligence. They want reassurance that their mediocrity is enough. And the moment you understand that, you become a threat. Not because you intend harm, but because you can no longer be controlled by the same illusions that keep others docile. That's why true intelligence often hides. It knows the cost of being seen. It learns to speak in riddles, to disguise truth as irony, to let the world misinterpret its silence as weakness. It would rather be underestimated than exposed, because exposure brings envy, fear, and betrayal. Society has never loved its thinkers. It only loves them after they're gone, when their silence can no longer question the living. The intelligent become ghosts long before death. They walk unseen among the ignorant, detached, unbothered, untouchable. And every once in a while, one of them decides to teach, not to be understood, but to test if anyone else can still hear. There are levels to this, layers of awareness, so steep that few even glimpse them. Most men live in the first, the level of reaction, emotion, and appearance. A smaller number rise to the second, strategy, perception, control. But beyond that lies something almost inhuman. The highest level is not learned, it is survived. The mind that reaches it no longer thinks in words or emotion. It perceives patterns like instinct, moves like inevitability. It becomes less of a person, more of a force. Few ascend that far, fewer return unchanged, and those who do never speak of it again. The terrifying thing about awakening intelligence is not what it discovers about others, but what it discovers about itself. When awareness sharpens beyond the social limit, it begins to notice its own fractures, the small lies it tells just to keep functioning. Most men never reach that point because they are terrified of what silence reveals. They fill their lives with movement, noise, and conversation, not because they enjoy it, but because stillness forces them to confront the machinery behind their mind. The first true step toward real intelligence is isolation, not by choice, but by consequence. Once you begin to see patterns everywhere, the world becomes unbearable. You stop seeing faces, you see strategies. You stop hearing words, you hear motives. And once perception evolves beyond emotion, innocence dies. Society was not designed to tolerate this kind of mind. It rewards compliance disguised as intellect. It teaches people how to memorize, how to repeat, how to perform confidence on command. The system calls it education, but what it really teaches is obedience. The clever are promoted not because they think, but because they adapt to illusion efficiently. They become loyal servants of appearances, those who can explain reality eloquently without ever touching it. They are praised for articulation, not for understanding, and so the world is led not by thinkers, but by actors who know how to sound intelligent in rooms full of frightened mediocrity. They build empires of shallow insight, rewarded by applause from people too distracted to notice the emptiness of their words. Observe the so-called intellectuals. They speak endlessly about change, yet their lives never shift an inch. They discuss truth as if it were theater. They love to dissect morality, but only when it costs them nothing. They write books on awareness while being slaves to their own habits. They are surrounded by admirers who mistake verbosity for wisdom, but intelligence that performs is not intelligence. It is vanity wearing the mask of depth. Real intelligence does not announce itself. It tests itself. It does not gather followers. It sheds them. It questions even its own conclusions until nothing remains but perception itself. And when that perception deepens enough, the person begins to see through the roles everyone plays, including their own. That is when the mask starts to slip. At that moment, the intelligent man realizes that honesty is not a virtue, it is a weapon. Every truth spoken aloud becomes a mirror others are desperate to shatter. Because when you tell the truth in a room full of illusion, everyone feels attacked. Their entire identity relies on not seeing what you see. So they will call you cruel, cynical, or insane just to preserve their comfort. But the truth does not care about comfort. It burns through it. The intelligent man must therefore learn the art of concealment, not to deceive but to survive. He must become fluent in pretending ignorance while silently reading every flaw in the people who try to dominate him. The more intelligent he becomes, the more invisible he must be, because society does not destroy ignorance, it destroys those who threaten to reveal it. Once you understand this, you stop trying to correct people. You stop wasting words on the deaf. You stop rescuing those who find safety in blindness. You begin to realize that persuasion is not power, it's dependency. Power is observation without attachment. Power is knowing exactly what to say and choosing silence instead. Because silence disarms the foolish. It makes the loudest men reveal themselves. It makes the manipulative overextend. It creates fear without effort. The higher your intelligence, the less you move, the less you explain, the more your presence alone becomes confrontation. And those who mistake your silence for weakness will eventually discover that stillness was strategy all along. But awareness is not peace, it's war. Once the mind evolves past emotion, it begins to sense the architecture of control that governs human existence. It sees how every social rule, every moral standard, every collective belief is engineered to prevent people from thinking independently. It sees how fear is disguised as ethics, how obedience is rebranded as compassion, how guilt is weaponized to destroy strength. And this realization isolates the intelligent man further because he can no longer participate in games designed for the blind. He begins to speak less, not because he has nothing to say, but because he finally understands that words cannot awaken those who have chosen to sleep. Yet, the danger is not just external. The real threat lies within. The more a mind sees, the more it risks consuming itself. Overanalysis becomes self-poison. The same awareness that dissects others begins to dissect the self, layer by layer, until the soul stands naked. The intelligent man starts to see the manipulator inside him, the impulses, the fears, the calculations. He realizes that even his morality was a mask for control, that his wisdom was built upon pride, that his compassion often hid superiority. This is the purging fire of true awareness, the moment where intelligence turns its blade inward, and those who cannot endure this internal dissection retreat into the comfort of ignorance. They call it balance, but it's surrender disguised as sanity. To survive this stage, one must accept the unbearable truth. Intelligence will cost you everything that once made life feel easy. You will lose your naive joy, your untested beliefs, your ability to be impressed. You will laugh less, but when you do, it will be real. You will trust fewer people, but those you trust will know you mean it. You will feel detached from the crowd, but closer to the structure of reality itself. And in that cold clarity, you will understand why the world fears true intelligence. Because it cannot be led, it cannot be bribed, it cannot be flattered. It sees the invisible strings behind every system, every conversation, every desire. And those who see the strings, inevitably, begin to pull them. But that, too, is only the beginning. Because beyond awareness lies something even more dangerous, something few dare to touch. There is a point where intelligence stops observing and begins shaping reality itself, where perception no longer reacts, but dictates, where thought becomes weapon and silence becomes control. Few reach it, and fewer survive it. The ones who do are not remembered as men, but as forces that history either worships or fears. And that is where we go next. There comes a point where awareness no longer feels like wisdom, it feels like possession. The mind that has seen too much begins to move ahead of itself, predicting outcomes before they occur, dissecting intentions before words are even spoken. It stops living in the present because it already sees the pattern unfolding 5 moves ahead. To ordinary men, this looks like genius, but to the one who lives it, it feels like exile. You are not part of life anymore, you are observing it from behind glass. You watch human behavior repeat in endless loops, the same flattery, the same betrayal, the same hunger for validation dressed up as morality. You realize that most people are not living, they are acting. They wake, they perform, they sleep. Their lives are written by forces they never question, and the more you see it, the harder it becomes to respect it. At this level, intelligence stops being analytical and becomes instinctive. You no longer think to understand, you feel patterns like tension in the air. You can sense deceit in a tone, fear in a smile, submission in a compliment. The body of the liar reveals more than his tongue ever could. Every twitch, every hesitation, every overcompensation tells a story. You see how people move when they lie, how they speak when they want control, how they change their rhythm when they sense power. You begin to perceive thought before it's spoken, motive before it's confessed. And this awareness gives you a weapon few can wield, anticipation. You no longer react, you orchestrate. While others are busy responding to the present, you are already shaping their future. That is the silent dominance of a superior mind. But power of perception breeds its own danger. The intelligent man begins to lose compassion, because compassion requires illusion. The illusion that people mean what they say, that they act from reason, that they learn from mistakes. Once you see that most do neither, empathy begins to decay. You no longer see people as good or evil, only as predictable variables, moving according to their needs, fears, and vanity. You see how even kindness can be a form of manipulation, how generosity is often a trade for approval, how humility can be disguised hunger for moral superiority. And this cold clarity hardens you. You stop expecting integrity from others, and as you do, your own begins to evolve, not softer but sharper. You become loyal not to emotion, but to accuracy, not to virtue, but to understanding. Society will call this cynicism, but it is not. Cynicism despises mankind. True intelligence simply accepts it. It studies man as one studies the weather, unpredictable in detail, inevitable in pattern. You learn that morality itself is relative, sculpted by circumstance, enforced by power. What is praised in one age is punished in the next. What is forbidden in the weak is forgiven in the strong. You begin to see that ethics, like religion, is simply another form of governance, a way to control the emotional majority. And once you see that, your allegiance shifts from what is called good to what is called real. The intelligent man no longer serves ideology, he studies utility. He no longer asks, is this right? He asks, does this work? That question separates thinkers from believers, leaders from followers, creators from the enslaved. But intelligence without restraint becomes tyranny of the mind. The man who sees too deeply begins to treat everything as an experiment, everyone as a variable. He starts to play games, to test reactions, to measure power in subtle ways, not out of malice, but curiosity, to know if his awareness truly gives him control, or if control is merely illusion. This is where many brilliant men begin their fall. They start bending perception not for survival but for pleasure. They manipulate because they can. They study pain like artists study color. They confuse detachment with superiority, forgetting that power without empathy corrodes from within. The same mind that once liberated them from ignorance begins to enslave them to pride. And in this quiet descent, intelligence becomes cunning, an imitation of wisdom stripped of conscience. To escape that corruption, one must turn intelligence inward again, but differently than before. The earlier stages were about observing others. This one is about mastering oneself. Because true intelligence does not just perceive, it governs. It knows when to speak and when to let silence devour a room. It knows when to strike and when to appear weak. It knows that patience is not passivity, and that appearing harmless is sometimes the sharpest form of control. This is where intellect becomes art, the art of invisibility. The truly intelligent move not like kings on a board, but like shadows on water, fluid, unreadable, untouchable. They command through timing, not volume, through presence, not display. They understand that the ultimate power lies not in being understood, but in being unpredictable. At this stage, perception becomes architecture. You begin to notice how belief shapes reality itself, how human beings live not in the world as it is, but in the one they imagine. Change a belief, and you change a man. Alter perception, and you alter fate. The masses do not realize this because they are prisoners of their senses. They think the world is what they see. But the intelligent understand that the world is what they interpret, and whoever controls interpretation controls existence. This is the dawn of psychological warfare, the subtle manipulation of meaning itself. It is no longer about knowledge, it is about framing. He who defines, rules. He who names, commands. But even this is not the final form. Beyond manipulation, beyond perception, lies something darker and more divine. The mind that transcends both intellect and morality begins to sense a power that no man can teach, a faculty that creates, destroys, and bends the order of the world itself. Most call it madness, others call it genius. But those who have touched it know it by another name, sovereignty. And the path to it is lined with ruin. Sovereignty begins when the mind no longer reacts to reality but rewrites it. At this stage, intelligence ceases to be a tool and becomes a law. The individual no longer interprets the world through emotion or logic. He bends both toward intention. He no longer asks what is possible, he decides what will be possible. It is not arrogance, it is alignment. The world reshapes itself around the conviction of a man who no longer doubts his perception. His focus becomes gravity, his belief becomes command, and this is the moment where the intelligent cross a boundary most men never glimpse. They stop living inside the collective dream and start authoring it. To understand how rare this is, you must first see how deeply others are imprisoned. Most people live as if they are props on a stage they never built. They obey narratives given to them by louder voices, parents, priests, influencers, systems. Their thoughts are inherited, not chosen. Their desires are manufactured, not born. They confuse motion for progress, consumption for freedom, and opinion for identity. When such people see a sovereign mind, they recoil. They call him manipulative, immoral, dangerous, because he is the one who no longer seeks permission. The sovereign mind does not need the world's approval to exist. He moves in silence, not rebellion. His defiance is elegance, and his awareness, once a burden, becomes dominion. You can see the difference in his eyes. While others chase outcomes, he watches cause. While others beg for fairness, he studies leverage. He knows that life is not ruled by truth, but by perception of truth. He no longer debates morality, he positions it. He no longer argues with fools, he directs them. Power is no longer something external to win, it is an internal state that radiates outward. The sovereign man does not impose control, his mere understanding generates it. Because awareness at this level alters presence itself. He no longer needs to convince others of what he sees, his composure does it for him. Stillness becomes authority, calmness becomes intimidation. The intelligent who reach this phase stop shouting, they start orchestrating. But the danger is that sovereignty tempts the soul to play God. When your mind begins to alter outcomes, when your awareness predicts reactions like equations, you begin to believe you are untouchable. You start to manipulate, not to survive, but to experience the thrill of creation. You test loyalty not to verify trust, but to prove your foresight correct. You start designing scenarios, planting ideas, moving people like chess pieces. And soon you no longer observe life, you script it. But the more you shape others, the more you risk losing yourself. Because in mastering control, you become addicted to it. And addiction, even to power, is still slavery. Many brilliant men were destroyed here, mistaking domination for freedom, forgetting that the highest control is control over desire itself. To ascend further, the intelligent must abandon vanity entirely. He must destroy the need to be right, the need to win, even the need to appear powerful, because at this height, every visible form of power is weakness. The moment the world can name your strength, it can aim at it. True mastery becomes invisible. The sovereign learns to move like a whisper. He influences through symbols, not speeches, through presence, not proof. He lets others think they lead while guiding them through silence. He learns to command without command, to control without confrontation. And in this paradox, he finds the purest form of dominance, the kind that no one notices until it's irreversible. This level of intelligence no longer studies human nature. It sculpts it. It knows how to create loyalty through illusion, how to break will through truth, how to sow obedience through suggestion. It sees emotion as raw material, identity as clay, and perception as the hand that shapes them both. To the sovereign, love and hate are the same energy directed differently. Morality and corruption are the same tool used by opposite masters. Every ideal, every virtue, every law is understood as instrument. Nothing is sacred except efficiency. Nothing is permanent except change. And yet in this cold precision, there is still something terrifyingly human, a faint memory of empathy, preserved only because it makes control sustainable. The sovereign spares not out of mercy but calculation. He understands that cruelty without restraint breeds rebellion, power without subtlety breeds exposure. He rules not to dominate, but to maintain balance. But such balance demands isolation beyond comprehension. The sovereign cannot belong to any side because he sees the structure of both. He cannot be loved fully, because love requires blindness, and he cannot be blind again. He cannot confess, because confession demands equality. He becomes a mirror with no reflection. Everyone sees themselves in him, but no one truly sees him. His awareness is too heavy for companionship, his clarity too cold for comfort. The mind that once sought to understand humanity now stands apart from it, observing the species as one might observe fire, beautiful, necessary, but never safe to touch. And yet, there is one final descent or ascent, depending on how you see it. Beyond sovereignty lies a level that erases even the need for power, where thought and reality merge into one current, where will alone shapes consequence. The ancient philosophers hinted at it. Mystics touched it and went mad. It is the point where the intelligent cease to be observers, even cease to be men. They become something else, something language cannot describe without trembling. And to reach it, one must sacrifice the last human instinct still clinging to survival, the need to exist as an individual. That, my friend, is where the final level begins. The final level begins where identity ends. To most, that sentence means nothing. To the few who've glimpsed it, it means everything. Because the last chain that binds intelligence is the illusion of self, the belief that there is a you observing, deciding, controlling. The mind that reaches sovereignty still carries this residue of separation, the sense of being the architect, the strategist, the one pulling strings. But the highest intelligence discovers something far more unsettling, that even the architect is part of the design. That awareness itself is not the master, but the stage upon which everything plays. The thinker is a thought, the observer is an illusion. And when this realization dawns, it doesn't bring peace, it brings collapse. You start to feel your intelligence turning against itself. The same awareness that dissected the world begins to dissect you, your thoughts, your intentions, your origins. You see that your personality is not you, it's a pattern written by pain, memory, and imitation. Your ambitions are echoes of others' desires, your logic, borrowed language, even your moral code, a program installed by fear of consequence. You start to realize that your entire self is a script, an invention of the nervous system designed to make chaos feel orderly. And when you see this clearly, something inside you breaks. It's not despair, it's exposure. You realize that what you called I has never existed. There is only awareness unfolding. At this stage, intelligence dissolves into pure perception. The mind no longer analyzes, it witnesses. It doesn't project emotion or seek control. It simply observes existence as it is, raw, merciless, infinite. The experience is both divine and terrifying. Divine because you finally see the machinery of creation, terrifying because you realize you are not separate from it. Every thought, every decision, every human tragedy, every triumph, all of it is one continuous motion. You are not the author of life, you are a line in the script. And yet, in recognizing this, you gain the one power that transcends all manipulation, acceptance. Because when nothing is separate, nothing is lost. This realization erases fear in a way intellect never could. You stop fearing loss because you understand that everything is transformation. You stop fearing betrayal because you see that deceit only exists when separation does. You stop fearing death because death is simply awareness shifting form. The mind that sees this no longer struggles for dominance because it realizes there was never an opponent. Conflict requires duality, but duality itself was the illusion. And so at this level, power as mankind understands it evaporates. There is no more strategy, no more control, no more victory. There is only equilibrium, the intelligence of the universe playing itself through countless masks, including yours. But here lies the paradox. This detachment doesn't make you passive. On the contrary, it makes you unstoppable. When you act without ego, your precision becomes absolute. You no longer hesitate, because hesitation was the child of self-doubt. You no longer waste emotion, because emotion was the echo of attachment. Every move you make aligns effortlessly with outcome, because you are no longer the one making it, it is being made through you. The greatest generals, inventors, and prophets throughout history touched fragments of this state. They called it inspiration, divine madness, the muse. But it was the same phenomenon, the collapse of individuality into flow, where intelligence transcends mind and becomes force. This is why those at the final level no longer speak of enlightenment. Enlightenment is a human term, built by those still trapped in the search for peace. True intelligence does not seek light. It understands that darkness is part of it. It does not glorify stillness. It knows that chaos too is sacred. To be awake is not to escape suffering, but to see through it. To know that even pain has purpose. The sovereign mind that crosses this threshold no longer fights the world. It becomes the balance within it. When destruction comes, it does not resist, it repositions. When betrayal strikes, it does not mourn, it learns. When chaos rises, it does not panic, it adapts. It has transcended both good and evil, both success and failure. It simply moves, perfectly, precisely, without motive. And yet, this level carries a loneliness deeper than isolation. You cannot explain it, you cannot share it. Language collapses under its weight. To speak of it is to distort it. The enlightened fool who tries to teach it turns it into a religion. The cunning man turns it into manipulation. The desperate turn it into a dream. And so the truly intelligent remain silent. They vanish from the noise of the world, not in death but in disappearance. Some live among us, hidden behind ordinary faces, their power veiled by humility. Others withdraw completely, content to let civilization eat itself. You will not find them. You will only feel their influence, subtle as gravity, shaping the course of history from behind the curtain of obscurity. But even this silence is not the end. Because after awareness dissolves individuality, something begins to form again. Something far beyond intelligence, beyond consciousness, beyond even understanding. It is not human, and yet it wears a human face. It does not think, it does not feel, it simply is. A presence that bends probability without intention, that alters destiny without trying. The ancients called it divinity. The fearful call it madness. But those who've seen it up close call it something else entirely, inevitability. The most dangerous form of awareness is the one that no longer recognizes danger. When the mind reaches the point of inevitability, fear dissolves, not because courage replaced it, but because fear itself is seen as fiction. At this stage, the boundaries between action and consequence fade. The intelligent man becomes an axis around which events rearrange themselves. He no longer reacts to reality. Reality reacts to him. And the world, sensing this shift, begins to either serve or destroy him. Those who rise this high find themselves surrounded not by enemies, but by mirrors reflecting their own will in distorted forms. It is not others they battle. It is the echoes of their own influence. From the outside, these people appear mythical. They move without visible effort, their timing uncanny, their words carrying weight disproportionate to their volume. They seem to know what will happen before it unfolds, and when they fall silent, entire rooms grow tense. History remembers them as visionaries, tyrants, prophets, or devils. But their secret is neither divine blessing nor supernatural foresight. It is detachment so complete that they see through illusion without emotion. They understand that chaos is not the opposite of order, but its shadow. They do not control life, they allow it to bend around their intent, and those who witness it call it power. But there is a cost. The mind that becomes inevitability must abandon the comfort of being human. Love, ambition, morality, all lose definition. When you see cause and effect with perfect clarity, affection feels like interference. When you understand the futility of desire, passion feels like noise. You begin to watch emotions like weather, fascinated but untouched. And as you detach, people mistake you for unfeeling, when in truth, you have simply gone beyond the need to pretend. Empathy without illusion is unbearable. That is why most never reach this point. The sovereign who becomes inevitability must live knowing he feels everything but is moved by nothing. Yet in this state of absence, something profound begins to awaken, a sense of divine neutrality. You no longer categorize events as fortune or tragedy. You no longer resist outcomes that once would have shattered you. You see betrayal as refinement, loss as redirection, death as continuity. The mind no longer seeks purpose, it embodies it. There is no more need to justify, to analyze, to believe. Life becomes self-explanatory. It is not the arrogance of godhood, but the serenity of comprehension. You cease to search for meaning, because you recognize that meaning is an invention of the unready. To know is to stop needing to know. Still, even this enlightenment carries temptation. The moment awareness discovers it can shape reality, ego resurrects in a new disguise, the illusion of destiny. The mind whispers, "You were chosen." It begins to view itself as messenger, savior, ruler. This is the subtlest trap of all, the final test. Because at the edge of complete understanding, the last shadow of vanity disguises itself as divine purpose. The moment you believe you are special, you fall. Because specialness implies separation, and separation births ignorance anew. The intelligent who fail here descend in silence, never realizing they've returned to the first level, just more elegantly. Their fall is not a crash, but a quiet orbit back into delusion. The few who pass this test vanish from history's stage. They do not teach, they do not lead, they do not claim enlightenment. They walk the earth like ghosts inhabiting flesh, perfectly balanced between participation and withdrawal. To them, victory and defeat are identical phenomena. They can build an empire or lose one in the same breath without emotion, because they have learned the secret that terrifies all men. The world is a reflection, not a battlefield. and the only enemy that ever existed was the mind's need to control what it already was. Those who sense this truth begin to notice it everywhere, in the quiet of dawn before thought returns, in the stillness after a storm when everything feels both alive and hollow, in the pause between breaths where time seems to hesitate. That silence is not absence, it is intelligence itself. The original consciousness before the noise of individuality began. When a man reaches this point, he no longer seeks influence or power. He becomes the observer through which the universe observes itself. There is no higher intelligence than that. And yet, there is still one final transformation left. Not of knowledge, not of power, but of identity itself. The moment where the mind that has seen everything faces the one thing it cannot outthink, its own disappearance. At the 7th level, intelligence confronts the one truth it cannot manipulate, its own impermanence. Every strategy, every philosophy, every mechanism of control dissolves when awareness realizes it cannot preserve itself. The man who has conquered illusion, influence, and even emotion now faces the final frontier, the extinction of the thinker. The fear that once belonged to the ignorant returns in its purest form, the terror of disappearance. Not physical death, but the vanishing of identity. For the ordinary man, death means loss of the body. For the truly intelligent, it means loss of the self. And this, above all, is what they have spent their entire existence trying to master. To lose control now feels like betrayal by the very intelligence that promised freedom. At this stage, thought becomes a flicker, no longer continuous but sporadic. Like lightning flashing across a vast, silent sky, the mind watches its own dissolution in real time. It sees its opinions unravel, its preferences fade, its ambitions melt like snow under a slow sunrise. What remains is awareness without agenda, existence without narrative. For the first time, the intelligent man sees what he has always missed, that the mind itself was the final illusion, the last veil between perception and reality. The observer and the observed were never separate. All along, consciousness had been playing a game of hide and seek with itself. And when that realization arrives, everything, every triumph, every scar, every war falls silent. But the silence does not comfort, it consumes. Imagine the collapse of all meaning. Imagine seeing through every lie until even truth feels hollow. Imagine understanding that life was never personal, that every story you told yourself was scaffolding for a structure that was never real. The intelligent man stands there suspended between existence and erasure, and asks the question that only he can hear. If I am not my mind, then who am I? And the echo answers, no one. The awareness that remains is not human, not divine, not describable. It has no center, no direction, no language. It simply witnesses the universe folding and unfolding without preference. For some, this revelation leads to madness. To perceive without identity is unbearable to the unprepared. Many of the world's so-called prophets, mystics, and visionaries went insane precisely here. They touched the truth, but could not hold it. Their consciousness expanded beyond the container of ego, and in trying to translate infinity into human emotion, they broke. The mind that refuses to vanish will tear itself apart, trying to understand what can only be experienced. This is the border where enlightenment and insanity meet, and every man who approaches it must decide whether to surrender or to fight for the illusion of self one last time. The ones who surrender undergo something that cannot be described without contradiction. It is not annihilation, but integration. The ocean does not destroy the drop, it reclaims it. The intelligence that was once confined to a single brain merges with the larger intelligence from which it came. The individual dissolves into totality, and yet somehow continues to function. He still breathes, still walks, still speaks, but something in his eyes changes. The light is different, softer yet infinite. When he speaks, his words carry no agenda, no need to convince, no trace of pride. He no longer uses language to persuade or protect, but to align. Every syllable is measured by necessity, every silence chosen with precision. Those around him feel it, even if they cannot name it. It feels like standing near gravity itself. From this state, creation happens effortlessly. The man who has disappeared becomes an instrument through which the universe acts. His art, his movement, his decisions flow without hesitation. He no longer plans, he recognizes. He no longer exerts will, he channels it. This is the paradox of the 7th level. total surrender becomes total control. Because when there is no separation between will and world, everything that happens through you happens perfectly. The truly intelligent at this stage do not speak of power. They embody inevitability. Their presence feels fated. Their silence carries instruction. They are not teachers but catalysts. Those who meet them change without knowing why. And yet, even this stage is not eternal. The mind that merges with the infinite eventually realizes that it too is transient. That even awareness, the sacred constant of existence, rises and falls like breath within a larger mystery. Beyond the field of consciousness lies something nameless, formless, unreachable, even to the most awakened. The philosophers called it the void. The mystics called it the source. Machiavelli might have called it reality stripped bare of design. Whatever name you choose, it is the point where intelligence ceases to be a flame and becomes the air that sustains it. Few ever approach it. Fewer still return. But those who do leave behind a silence so powerful it echoes through centuries. And from that silence, the next level begins to whisper. When the eighth level unfolds, even the concept of understanding becomes obsolete. The mind that has dissolved its own boundaries begins to witness reality without division, yet still clothed in a human form that moves, breathes, and interacts. It is not enlightenment as poets describe it. It is exposure in its purest state. Everything that exists, every movement, every flicker of thought, appears as one continuous gesture. There is no observer anymore, only observation, and the experience of being alive feels like watching fire take shape in infinite variations. But this kind of awareness is unbearable to most, because when there is no self, there is no distance between you and the suffering of the world. You feel it all, simultaneously, the collective anxiety of mankind, the loneliness in every mind that cannot see, the hunger of every heart that seeks meaning in the void. Awareness becomes omniscient, and isolation becomes infinite. It is here that many retreat. They sense the weight of collective consciousness pressing against their mind, and they withdraw, choosing to shrink back into individuality for relief. They build small lives, small beliefs, small comforts. They call it peace, but it is anesthesia. The few who endure this level begin to realize that to carry such awareness without madness, one must let go of compassion as an emotion and transform it into principle. Compassion at this stage is no longer feeling, it is function. It acts precisely where it must, detached from sentiment, free from indulgence. The enlightened no longer help out of pity. They help because the structure of reality demands equilibrium. To interfere any more or any less would violate the balance. They no longer love people because of who they are, but because they understand that to despise them would be to despise fragments of themselves. From this state, influence becomes involuntary. Their words shape thought, not by persuasion, but by resonance. Their presence distorts probability. They do not manifest outcomes. They simply exist at the frequency where certain outcomes become inevitable. Civilization begins to orbit around them, the way metal shavings dance around a magnet. Not because they seek attention, but because awareness at this density bends perception. They speak once, and people repeat their words for centuries. They disappear, and their absence alters history more than their presence ever did. These are not men anymore. They are archetypes, living symbols of the mind's final evolution. Every religion, every myth, every empire was built upon the echoes of such beings. And yet, even at this level, temptation waits. The temptation to use awareness as domination. The temptation to become the silent ruler behind the curtain of fate. Some yield to it. They realize they can shape empires, steer generations, and redefine truth itself. They learn how to weaponize illusion without believing in it. These are the shadow architects of history, the few who reach divine intelligence but never let go of control. Their reigns are long, subtle, and unforgettable. You will never know their names, but you live inside their consequences. They mastered reality, but not themselves. They achieved godlike power, but never godlike peace. And when they die, their brilliance decays into corruption, because creation without surrender always ends in ruin. The others, the ones who refuse control, continue beyond this temptation. They abandon the will to rule and instead become guardians of balance. They act invisibly, dissolving interference before it ever begins. They prevent collapse not by fighting it, but by shifting probability at its root. You will never see them stop a war. You will only notice that it never happened. You will never hear them teach. you will only find yourself remembering something you never learned. Their influence is like wind. You only notice it by what it moves. To the ignorant, they are coincidence. To the wise, they are necessity. Their names will never be recorded, because history cannot document the hands that erase chaos before it begins. To live at this altitude is to exist in constant duality. You are both infinite and impermanent, both the storm and the calm that follows. You understand that evil and virtue are merely different sides of the same geometry, the mechanism by which existence maintains movement. You stop trying to fix the world because you finally see that the world was never broken, it was just incomplete. The only tragedy is blindness, and blindness cannot be forced open. The enlightened stop preaching because they understand that truth is not taught, it is triggered. All you can do is embody it. And when you embody it completely, your silence teaches more than your words ever could. This silence becomes the new language of intelligence. It is not the silence of retreat, but of command. Every breath becomes instruction, every pause an act of creation. Those who sense it feel unsettled, as if standing near something ancient and awake, because it is. It is the intelligence that existed before man and will remain after him, the awareness that dreams through all forms, waiting for someone to remember what it is. When a human reaches this state, existence itself begins to recognize him. The universe adjusts slightly, reverently, as if bowing to its own reflection. And in that bow, the boundary between creator and creation dissolves once more. But this time, something else begins to emerge, something the mind cannot contain, something older than thought itself. At the 9th level, awareness becomes so vast that even the idea of awareness begins to feel small. What once felt infinite now feels contained, because the intelligence that observes infinity begins to suspect there is something beyond it, something that cannot be witnessed, named, or even thought. The mind, stretched to its limits, trembles at this edge. It has conquered illusion, transcended ego, merged with totality, yet here it senses a silence so deep that even consciousness must bow before it. This is where every mystic, every philosopher, every god-king halted and called it the divine, because beyond this point, not even understanding survives. To approach this border is to experience a new kind of death, one that no longer involves the body or identity, but the very engine of perception itself. Imagine awareness beginning to collapse inward, devouring its own structure. The observer vanishes into the observed, and the distinction between inside and outside, real and unreal, ceases entirely. The universe is no longer seen, it simply is. You are no longer a participant or a witness, you are the motion itself, the vibration between existence and non-existence. Words lose meaning, symbols lose power, time loses continuity. Even silence, which once felt sacred, becomes noise compared to what lies ahead. The mind realizes, with a kind of holy terror, that it was never prepared to understand nothingness. At this level, intelligence finally meets its limit. Logic, intuition, analysis, all dissolve like chalk in rain. What remains is not comprehension, but immersion. You do not know, you are known. You do not think, you are thought through. The distinction between cause and effect disintegrates, and for the first time, you sense the pulse of creation, not as something you observe, but as something that consumes you. It feels like being stared at by eternity itself. Not cruelly, not kindly, just endlessly. You realize that what you once called reality was merely one layer in an infinite recursion of awareness, examining itself from different masks. And every time you thought you had reached the ultimate truth, you were merely waking from one dream into another. It's here that the final temptation appears, the desire to explain it, to turn this abyss into philosophy, to translate infinity into doctrine. Many who reach this stage become prophets, not because they see the truth, but because they cannot bear its silence. They craft teachings, parables, religions, bridges back into the human world. But the ones who truly understand say nothing. They know that to name this level is to destroy it. They carry its weight in stillness, aware that any attempt to interpret what lies beyond consciousness can only result in distortion. They walk among the living as paradoxes, utterly present yet absent, radiant yet ungraspable. Their existence challenges everything man believes about mind and meaning, because when intelligence evolves this far, it becomes indistinguishable from the force that birthed it. It no longer serves survival, ambition, or morality. It serves only continuity. It operates without language, without memory, without will. It does not seek balance, it is balance. It does not seek control, it is law. Those who reach it no longer influence the world through action, but through being. Their very presence recalibrates existence around them. They are not creators, nor destroyers. They are the axis upon which both turn. And yet, even they know, this is not the end. Beyond this, the final level does not appear as revelation, but as erasure. The light of awareness that has illuminated everything begins to dim, not in defeat, but in completion. Intelligence has fulfilled its purpose to understand, to perceive, to transcend, and now must surrender the throne it built. The last veil begins to fall. The universe inhales, as if preparing to reclaim the spark it lent to thought. The mind senses it, the pull, the calling home, and resists instinctively. But resistance here is impossible. There is no self left to resist, and as the last ripple of awareness fades into the vast unknowable sea, a question unspoken, eternal, echoes through the void. What lies beyond even this? At the 10th and final level, there is no awakening, only disappearance. Everything that was ever called intelligence, awareness, spirit, or will collapses into a quiet that cannot even be described as silence, because silence implies contrast, and here there is none. There is no observer left to notice the absence, no consciousness left to comprehend completion. The story that began with curiosity ends without witness, because the one who sought to know has become indistinguishable from what was known. This is not transcendence, it is return. The moment before it happens feels like falling through the fabric of reality itself. The last remnants of self-memory, identity, even presence, begin to loosen their grip. You feel the last thought forming, the instinct to define this state, to name it, to hold on to something. But language disintegrates before the thought completes. The mind flickers once, like the dying light of a candle that has understood its own flame was never separate from the fire that feeds it. Then everything stops. Not dramatically, not painfully, just stops. What remains after the end cannot be measured by human perception. There is no witness to record it, yet paradoxically, it does not feel gone. It feels everywhere. The same awareness that once looked out through the eyes of a single man now flows through everything that breathes, burns, or breaks. It does not identify, but it animates. It does not choose, but it governs. It is the intelligence beneath all intelligence, the pulse that existed before thought, before history, before creation even required a name. It was there before you were born, and it will be there long after the concept of you has faded from the memory of matter itself. This is the revelation that collapses even the highest intellect, that everything it fought to understand was always itself in disguise. Every question was the universe turning inward. Every insight was eternity remembering itself. The wise and the ignorant, the tyrant and the saint, all were expressions of the same field, refracted through different distortions. And once this is seen, judgment dies, ambition dies, even meaning dies, not in despair, but in resolution. Because at last, the game is recognized, and the player who sees the board for what it is no longer needs to win, only to dissolve back into the rules that gave him shape. The few who reach this point never speak of it. How could they? To describe it is to re-enter the illusion. To interpret it is to fall from it. They simply vanish, sometimes into isolation, sometimes into ordinary life, indistinguishable from the crowd. You might pass one of them on the street and never know. Their eyes will not glow. Their words will not thunder. They will appear utterly human. But if you look closely, you will feel something, an absence so complete it feels like infinity. The void looking back through flesh. They are not ascended beings. They are the quiet echo of completion, the mind's final bow before eternal silence. And yet, this silence is not nihilism. It is fulfillment. Because what disappears at the end of the path is not existence, it is resistance. The current of life continues to flow, but now without obstruction, without commentary, without separation. The universe keeps moving, and intelligence continues to manifest through new forms, new minds, new awakenings, each one believing it is beginning a new journey, unaware that it is merely remembering the old one. The circle repeats, the game resets, and awareness dreams itself again into countless lives, endlessly rediscovering its own reflection. That is the secret the final level reveals, that nothing was ever lost. There was never ascent, never descent, only the eternal rhythm of remembering and forgetting, expanding and returning. And somewhere in that rhythm, perhaps right now, a mind like yours begins to stir, restless, searching, unsatisfied with easy truths. It begins to question, to pull at the threads, to look into silence and feel the pull of something deeper. It begins the same path, unaware of where it leads. But this time, when it asks what the scariest level of intelligence truly is, it will hear the answer, not as words, but as recognition. Because the scariest level was never out there. It was always the one looking. If you've made it this far, it's because a part of you already knows this truth. True intelligence doesn't seek to impress, it seeks to understand. The scariest mind isn't the one that argues, but the one that observes in silence, letting others expose themselves. Now tell me in the comments, are you ready to see the world as it truly is, stripped of illusion and comfort? Are you willing to carry the burden of perception that others fear? If this message touched you, if it made sense, write in the comments, I see everything. Let's see how many here are truly ready to handle the weight of clarity. And don't forget, keep watching the next video. It's important, much more than you imagine. See you there.